Sorry for lighting. Yet again, I strike again. My skills are amazing. I mean, if I had a ring light, I do have a little one that I put on my, I do have one that I put onto the phone, but I don't know where it is, and I don't know where the charger for it is, so hey, we'll just work with this. So I'll just look blotchy and shadowy, but that's all right. So, okay, there's been a few, it's kind of, you know, new stuff, but it's just the old stuff, right? There's nothing actually new. There's never anything new in Delphi these days, right? Okay, there really won't be anything new, I believe anyway, until Richard Allen is on trial, and that's that, right? Hello, Yeoman 112. That was 11th of the 2, or rather 2nd of February. 11th of February is when some people say is the last date that Libby was seen or alive, and also Yeoman is how she would hashtag some of her videos, some of her snaps, her TikTokies, her musicalies, YOMAN hashtag. Yes, this vulnerable little girl who was very unprotected. She was pretty much laid bare on the internet. So, I was just going to talk through a few things that have been coming up lately. It doesn't mean that there's any new information. What it means is that there's more for people to look at and disseminate and slice and dice and, you know, add on to their theories and things, right? And discard some things and just keep others depending on their angle. So on Fig Solves, Fig has uploaded Hannah Shakespeare's well-produced, high production value pilot that she made, which is, you know, a documentary. She got interested in the crime of the murders of Abby and Libby. She's a Hollywood writer-director. She writes the storylines for crime shows and things like that. So she's always had an interest. But of course, you know, as she kind of explains, it's a completely different kettle of fish when you are in charge of the story. You're developing the scene and the characters and the storyline and the outcome. You're in control. It's a completely different ball game to taking your interest and your abilities and applying them to true life crime, real crime, where real people are involved, and you're sifting through circumstantial evidence. You know, this is not convicting evidence, it's circumstantial. Or when you're trying to work through timelines, you never have all the information. And, you know, she's discovering that she loves to investigate. She mentioned a UK crime that she went and actually solved. There was the identity of a man that police were, and MSM was saying, look, you know, we just can't find the identity of this person that's turned up dead. And so she thought, well, that sounds utterly ridiculous in this digital age. And from what I can remember from what she said, she went to the UK, or she solved it somehow. She probably wouldn't have to go to the UK to solve something if you can just find someone's identity online through digital means. So she got really interested in Delphi. And of course, when she arrives in Delphi, she sees how beautiful this town is. It really is picturesque. It's beautiful. People work hard to maintain the town and try and keep its heart beating. And I don't think enough outsiders recognize this. It's a small population that has just flatlined, and industry has gone out, but they're trying to build up, cultural aspect and the scenic beauty for tourists, make something happen there, right? And I don't think that's appreciated quite enough. And at the same time, you think there's these people, sometimes, they're just really just so involved in their own pet projects and things. And I guess this is just human nature often, right? That they're not really paying attention to other things that are going on in council and where other funds are going, because look, they just want to make sure that they're raising all their money to refurbish the opera house and to be able to have events, theatre, bands, community events, etc. there, have shows on where tourists will come in and there's something to do. I mean, it's all very valid, but they're probably not all like Debbie Lowe, are they? Where they are really taking note of how decisions are made and where money is spent. We all are aware, if you're a Delphinian murder, what do we call? Don't want to say true crime junkie, because, we're looking for answers for all sorts of reasons. And sometimes it's just because we just don't like injustice. We just don't like that, great sadism and cruelty can go unpunished. So I didn't really want to talk about anything like that, but so she's mentioning that, well, I could have designed this town for a movie. I could have designed this town for the purpose of a murder for a mystery. It's perfect. It's got everything. She could probably picture an entire storyline around just seeing the town. She interviews several people, from Max Snowberger, is it? All the way to Mike and Patty, of course. She starts with them, then talks with Anna, she talks with Holman, she talks with Lazenby. I think people are going to get quite confused because they won't just stop and take one little breath. Maybe some buffs, maybe we're buffs, yeoman. Advocates, I don't know. I think people are going to get quite confused too readily by a few things that are in there, and there's filmic tricks for atmosphere that I didn't appreciate, because it's just misleading for no reason other than she knows what looks good. She knows how to draw people in and to create moments and feelings. So I don't think we should forget that. I don't think we should forget that this is a very experienced crafter, a creator. Okay, she's very experienced creator in creating moments and feelings in an audience. Okay, so might talk about a couple of things later. I don't know if it really matters. But for example, people will hear what Max said. Oh, I last talked to them on the night of the 13th before they were killed on, and people will say, but they were killed on the 13th apparently. What does this mean? But it just means like in the wee hours of the 13th of February, probably, because Libby and Abby were up past midnight. So on the 13th, here we have a person, Max, a boy who we've seen, hi medicine man, peace. Here we have Max, who's now, I think, 19. I think he was around 14 years old at the time, and was friends with Abby and Libby, but I think close friends with Libby. People that run their tiny little whirligigs about, Well, no. Libby was dead already, and then Abby was lured to the house and then was killed in Libby's room, and that's why they painted or replaced the boards in the house and painted the house. You know, Max knew Libby really well, and they're going to try and say, are they? They haven't even thought about this, but they'll try and say that Kelsey was writing as Libby, and they're going to try and say that Kelsey was texting her mother on the morning of February the 13th. Let me just try and stay in some track. But okay, so Max, he was in contact with Libby. Now, you may or may not believe it was Libby herself, but if it is truly Libby, what does that do for your timelines and the fact that they were murdered, you know, according to some people, 2 or 3 days prior, right? It just blows it out of the water. So she spoke to Holman, she spoke to Lazenby. You know, Holman talks about having knowledge of the social media accounts, that they did have the telephone, expressed that there was no way they could ever talk about the mode of death for the girls, and that it just wasn't appropriate, it wouldn't help, and really they just need the image out there of Bridge Guy so that the person that recognizes this person can come forward. And Lazenby, you know, took a crack at Carrie, but I think we need to look at this two ways. Now, it seems that Derek German gets such a pass, doesn't he? I personally feel that a person that has lost guardianship of his own children should not be living under the same domestic roof, especially when they've got felony charges. And the reason why they lost the ability to care for these children was they were in jail for producing, using, selling crystal meth. Why is this person living under the roof? Even though Libby adored Derek German, okay? That doesn't matter. There's a lot of parental alienation going on, like Derek good, Carrie bad. Yeah, you know, Kelsey was older than Libby and would have more memory of hard times with Carrie, where she probably felt, yeah, Carrie just let us down immensely, and Libby just doesn't realize. So of course she's pining for Carrie more. But it does seem there's alienation going on there, if you can believe what Lazenby is saying about Mike and Patty being the ones to say, no, there was no relationship between Libby and Carrie. They barely had anything to do with each other. Carrie has said, and I think it's on, there's so many of these channels that all sound the same. Is it WTKR, Indianapolis or something? 5 years ago, she Snapchatted back and forth with Libby that morning. She doesn't say she texted. She doesn't say, well, we always Snapchatted every morning, but this morning I did get texts. You know, and yeah, sure, if someone is in control of Libby's phone, they could look back and see how Libby normally communicates with her mother and emulate that, sure. But again, this timeline of, no, Libby was already murdered and then Abby was murdered later, or whatever, or they were taken and held somewhere, they were murdered on the 12th or the 11th, you know, all the BS, right? They conveniently write off Carrie Timmons, you know, which might seem what the police want to do as well, but we need to understand that there are legalities. I don't know what the difference would be between having guardianship and just having some sort of custody or whatever of the girls, and Carrie not having any custody of the girls. I don't know if legally that means that she is not treated. Remember the furor with Kay and Larry actually being told that they weren't family to JJ, even though Kay is a blood grandmother to JJ, because Laurie and Charles Fellow had adopted JJ into their family and it took them out of him. Anyway, there are things like this, and we just, need to be aware that there are legal things that police can't do. They can't go and just tell someone if they've lost custody, and so now they're not legally in charge of their children. Now, this should be up to Mike and Becky Patty, and I think they are being petty, the petty patties, by not being more communicative with Carrie. They know more about the situation. Maybe it's because Kelsey doesn't like her mother. Kelsey's a grown woman now. She wasn't at the time of the murders, but she's a grown woman. She is married. She's out of the home. It shouldn't have any bearing on the Patties communicating with Carrie. I think it's just unusually cruel and unnecessary, and I think there's just basic human decency and courtesy. Doesn't matter what they think of Carrie, what the history is. Libby loved her mother. Carrie loved Libby. And yeah, both Derek and Carrie failed to the point where neither of the parents had custody. It just so happened that the paternal grandparent and the step-grandfather had guardianship at the time the girls were murdered, and they certainly hadn't been paying enough attention to Libby's social media presence. She was absolutely vulnerable. She was doing what a lot of young girls are doing, and that's looking for attention online, and some of them are very young when they're doing it. They don't understand things. No matter how savvy they might be, how bright they might be. And there's a lot of girls, 10, 11, that are very vulnerable, and that's how old Libby started out. It went on for several years with the Paddies just not paying attention, perhaps until Libby explained that she was in a pickle, and they decided to reset the phone, and out of guilt and shame, they are not wanting to admit that they finally, in the end, a week before Libby's death, realized how deeply she was enmeshed in a world that was way too sophisticated and dangerous for her. So he says, Leesenby says to Hannah Shakespeare, do you know her history? Very pointedly, right? Now, yeah, this is probably a man who personally and whose team has a first-hand experience of managing Carrie Timmons when she's been out of control on alcohol, as she says, and maybe on drugs, and has had to arrest her, was maybe called out to wherever Derek and Carrie were living for the domestic violence that was probably occurring between them, right? That is a child abuse. When parents are warring, when adults are warring in a house and the children are under that domestic roof, they don't need to be abusing the children verbally. They just need to be creating the situation that is a domestic violence situation, and those children are victims of domestic violence. And perhaps he's seen a lot of that. There could have been a heck of a lot of shenanigans going on when Libby was 2 years old, 3 years old, a toddler, and Kelsey a little bit older, old enough to remember maybe Carrie Timmons when she broke up with Derek, and maybe the girls were with her, maybe Carrie not dealing with that well and actually passing out drunk in front of them. Maybe, all the knowledge that we have about how the children of alcoholics suffer, that's very raw for Kelsey, okay? Yes? Hello. And you're right, that's my dog. Anywho, okay. So he may have seen her at her worst, and he's just holding on to these judgments. I think that's wrong. Of course, I think that's wrong. I don't think it's right that he is still judging her as that person when we've got Derek German still living under the roof, and he's the same. He's got the history. I'm sure Tobe has quite the history with Derek German and arresting him or seeing him in jail, knowing what his felonies were. But, you know, the friendship with Mike and Tobe, I mean, you know, it probably biases Tobe, and it shouldn't because he's a law enforcement officer. But, you know, Hannah said to Tobe, well, actually, you can't be right that you have to withhold information from Carrie because Libby and Kelsey weren't adopted by Becky and Patty. And he sort of goes, So, but, you know, I don't know what the truth is there, okay? Becky and Mike had guardianship, and that's why they're getting the information. And it's up to them. They need to communicate better. They need to grow the fuck up, frankly. Because Libby herself wanted a relationship with her mother, Snapchatted every day, and in Carrie's own testimony, and she said it more than once, people will try to, they spread, see, they become repeaters. People that don't like that fact spread the rumor that, no, that morning, it was actually only a text. Yeah, isn't bizarre, right? And so that gets repeated around the internets, okay? And then footage is just forgotten or not even looked for by the people that are hearing it. They just take it at the word, and then they just get all caught up in this, you know, blaming and in this, you know, in this kind of espionage mind, in these, you know, conspiracy theory angles without, and they're laboring under misapprehensions because it's Carrie herself who has said, I think she would remember that on the day that her daughter went missing and was murdered, she would remember if it was that morning that she Snapchatted with her or not. Okay, and she says she did. And if she thought something was strange about that, she would 100% be telling law enforcement about it. WRTV, I think it was, Indianapolis. Anyway, so there seems to be some sort of alienation going on there. But, you know, KG was older, and she would remember a lot more of how bad it was. But I'm sure it was bad at times with both parents. Okay. You know, and you've got the theory that Abby had to be killed as well because Libby wanted to tell her mother something, and so of course would have told Libby. You get people that talk about Libby being pregnant. There's absolutely no proof of that, and that would have been in the autopsy, and it's not. You know, you've got Keegan Klein, you know, he's a pathological liar, he's a dirtbag, and he weasels and manipulates young girls into giving images out. And in typical fashion, wouldn't you expect that someone like that is going to try and just turn the tables? So if he is constantly bugging Libby for more and more images, I mean, it's likely that Libby did actually send something that she wasn't proud of to Keegan Klein, to Anthony Schott's account, right? But, you know, him saying, oh, God, she was so annoying, she wouldn't leave me alone. That just says to me what I know about human nature and these pathological liars and these dirtbags. They're always turning the tables, they're always twisting. So he was probably blowing up her phone, obsessed maybe. Who knows? I don't know. But I would say that it's exactly the type of dissing that a predator would do of their victims. So Hannah brings up Derek German's felony history. She talks to Mike Grusso about it. So Mike Grusso, an ex or maybe a current at the time US Marshal. Now the US Marshals are the people that are actually making the arrests. You know, these are the people that hunt people down. I was talking just the other day about Letitia Stout, just in relation to her searches about face transplant surgery and wanting to escape, get a new social security number, etc., and just sort of juxtaposing that against a case that sort of resolved itself recently that had to do with a man from the US who was an on-the-run convicted felon who had escaped from prison where he'd been since he was 16 years old, and he got a new identity, married a couple of times, had some children, brought his family to Australia, and he's buried down at Mount Tamborine. But it's US Marshals that really get obsessed. They really get their minds running, and they don't give up. They're like the Terminators, and they're the ones usually, I'm just saying that, fbyWhy, right? The fbyWhy, when do they ever actually solve anything? They just go around looking for power and control. So she brings up the very haggard, pathetic theory, and that is that because of DG's drug involvement, somehow Libby had to die, or the girls had to die, or maybe that it's just to do with drugs, right? Because she makes a point. One of the first things she says about Delphi, amongst saying that it's so beautiful and everything, is, oh, and it's got a really big crystal meth problem. Well, all right, lady. And people diss the ballpark so much. Towns that work at giving their community something to do rather than go around sniffing glue, they're the ones that have children that turn out to have successful lives, that don't turn to crime to keep themselves occupied. This is exactly what Carrie Timmons said was the trouble with Delphi when she moved there. When she was 19 years old, following Derek German after meeting him, in another town, she said, look, it was so beautiful. Yes, she loved it. Nice little town, but nothing to do. When you're a teenage girl, nothing to do. You get in trouble. And they went around getting in trouble. And she had children very young, right? She was a young mother. And the relationship between her and Derek turned really nasty, and they both got into things, and and yet people go, wow, gee, they're really pushing for that ballpark. I mean, well, why didn't you say, wow, gee, they were really pushing to get that opera house refurbished? Wow, I mean, look, JC's bar went out of, that's a big thing, right? For a town to lose a bar that's just been there forever. That's a dying town. People are trying to save it, and you want to diss everything that they're doing to save it. Does it matter that it's in someone's name? It's too quick for you, was it? Let them just fuck around doing nothing for a few more years while teenagers just, feel disconnected and disenfranchised. Give them something to do. They need it. Towns need to have draw cards. They need things for people to do. And that keeps them out of trouble. And it's a good thing. But, that pondering about the revenge on Derek, so killed 2 little girls. I mean, there is absolutely no proof of that. But the way Carrie talked about it, she didn't talk about it in the sense, because there is all the gossip about Ashley Garth wanting to get back at Derek German because Derek German grasped on her and so is responsible for her losing custody of her children. This made her very sad. I really don't feel like she's probably had many nurturing bones in her body, but that's just me. She's a sadistic, cruel, nasty, really deranged person who manipulated people into killing for her. And yeah, so sure, that sort of person, yeah, might be one to take two young girls out. Why would you kill Abby? You know, why wouldn't you just go kneecap Derek? Why Abby as well, though, right? That just seems, even for an Ashley Garth, I mean, it just doubles the risk. People just don't seem to think about all the logistics involved in the theories that they're running. Oh, God. Lost my fucking Wi-Fi again, have I? Honestly, this coverage is the pits. It's really hard to stream. I might have to try and open a new stream.